The rain fell in thick gray sheets over Virginia Beach, a persistent drumbeat on the roof of the beat-up sedan. For Maya Alvarez, the weather matched her mood. Dreary, suffocating, and relentless. She gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles white, staring at the familiar, worn-out facade of the strip mall before her. It was just a grocery run. Milk, bread, eggs. The mundane errand felt like a Herculean task. Just 2 weeks prior, Maya's world had been a different kind of chaos. She was a combat-ready operator, a member of an elite and clandestine cadre within the United States Naval Special Warfare Development Group, what the world knew as the Navy SEALs. Her specialty was deniable operations, the kind of missions that never happened, in places that didn't exist on any map. She had called in fire on enemy positions, had moved through moonless nights with 100 pounds of gear on her back, and had looked into the eyes of men who wanted to kill her. And she was trained to be a ghost, a predator, a protector. But she was not trained for this. This was the quiet horror of the home front. The medical discharge board had used words like incompatible with continued service and psychological strain. The official diagnosis was a fancy term for the war she now fought inside her own head. The transition had been brutal. One day, she was a vital piece of Ah Jing-mi machine, surrounded by teammates who would die for her. The next, she was just Maya, and a woman alone in a world that felt alien and loud. The hyper-vigilance, the constant scanning for threats, the way she slept with a knife under her pillow. It didn't make her a warrior here. It made her strange, broken. The VA therapist said it was about reintegrating, about finding peace. But peace felt like a trap, a vulnerability she couldn't afford. She took a deep breath, the air thick with the smell of wet asphalt and her own stale coffee. She checked her surroundings, a habit etched into her very DNA. A young mother struggled with a stroller and an umbrella. An old man shuffled towards the pharmacy. A few teenagers loitered near the laundromat, their laughter sharp and sudden. Nothing registered as a direct threat, but her internal alarm system remained on high alert. She stepped out of the car, the cold rain immediately plastering her dark hair to her scalp. She pulled her hoodie tighter, a shapeless gray garment that helped her disappear. Invisibility was a skill she'd perfected, and she used it now more than ever. The fluorescent lights of the 24-hour grocery store hummed a monotonous tune. The air was a sterile mix of cleaning solution and overripe fruit. Maya grabbed a plastic basket and moved through the aisles with a purpose she didn't feel. She avoided eye contact, her gaze flicking from product labels to the reflections in the polished metal shelves, tracking the movements of the few other late-night shoppers. A man in a baseball cap lingered too long in the cereal aisle. She noted him, cataloged his features: worn-out sneakers, a frayed backpack, nervous energy. He was probably just a guy with a sugar craving, but her brain wouldn't let it go. She filed the information away and moved on. In the dairy aisle, she was reaching for a carton of milk when she felt it, a presence too close. The man with the baseball cap was now right behind her. She turned, and her body coiling with an almost imperceptible tension. He mumbled an apology, his eyes darting away, and shuffled past. She watched him head towards the front of the store. Maybe it was nothing. Probably it was nothing. She forced herself to breathe, to unclench her jaw. She paid for her few items with cash, refusing to use a credit card that could be traced. Another habit that was hard to break. The cashier, a bored-looking teenager with a nose ring, didn't even look at her. "Well, have a good one," she droned. Maya just nodded, grabbing her single plastic bag. The rain had softened to a drizzle as she walked back into the parking lot. The world was slick and shiny under the yellowish glow of the security lights. Her car was towards the back, away from the brighter lights near the entrance. She preferred the darkness. As she walked, her mind drifted, a dangerous lapse. She thought of her old team leader, Marcus. He had visited her yesterday, his face a mask of concern, poorly hidden behind a gruff demeanor. He talked about a private security gig, something to get her back in the game. She had deflected, claiming she needed more time. The truth was, she didn't know what she needed. She felt like a boat, cut loose from its moorings, drifting without an anchor. She fumbled in her pocket for her keys, the familiar weight of the car fob a small comfort. She was about 10 feet from her driver's side door when the world shattered. It started with a sound. A scuff of a shoe on wet pavement, too fast, too close, coming from her blind spot. Her training screamed at her a millisecond before the impact. She didn't have time to turn fully before a heavy body slammed into her from behind. The grocery bag flew from her hand, the carton of milk bursting on the asphalt with a dull thud. She was driven forward, her hips slamming against the side of her car, the breath knocked from her lungs in a painful grunt. "Give me the fucking purse!" The voice was a guttural hiss in her ear, reeking of cheap booze and stale cigarettes. An arm, thick and corded with muscle, locked around her throat, cutting off her air. Another hand clawed at her shoulder, yanking at the strap of the small crossbody bag she wore. In the reflection of her car window, she saw him. It was the man from the cereal aisle. His face was twisted, not with the cold calculation of a professional, but with the desperate, panicked rage of an addict. This wasn't a strategic takedown. This was a chaotic, violent scramble for cash. In that first, brutal second, as her carotid artery compressed and spots began to dance in her vision, Maya's brain didn't think mugging. It thought contact. It thought threat. The dissociation she felt from her civilian life vanished, replaced by a clarity that was as sharp and cold as the knife under her pillow. The fear was there, a primal flash, but it was instantly smothered by an avalanche of training, of muscle memory, of 1,000 drills run in the dark. He was bigger than her, stronger in a raw, brawling sense. But he was clumsy, his weight distributed poorly, his focus entirely on the purse. He made the fatal mistake of thinking she was just a woman, a victim. He didn't see the coiled spring, the operator who could clear a room in under 30 seconds. He saw easy prey. Her mind went into overdrive. A tactical assessment that took less than a heartbeat. Contact rear, chokehold, ineffective if addressed immediately. Primary weapon, his hands, focused on bag. Secondary weapon, unknown. Assumption, knife. Environment, wet parking lot, low light. Civilians, distant, unaware. Rules of engagement, protect self, end threat, minimal force if possible, but be prepared for lethal. The arm around her throat was a problem, but not an insurmountable one. Instead of clawing at it, and which would waste precious energy, she dropped her center of gravity. It was a move as natural as breathing. She bent her knees slightly, simultaneously driving her elbow back with every ounce of her 140-pound frame into his solar plexus. It wasn't a wild, panicked swing. It was a precise, devastating strike aimed at a bundle of nerves. He let out a choked, "Oof!" and the arm around her throat loosened for a fraction of a second. It was all she needed. She twisted violently, breaking his hold. Deacon spun to face him. She was no longer Maya Alvarez, the troubled veteran. She was Operator Alvarez, and she was in a kill box. For a moment, the man just stared, surprised. He was in his late 20s, his face gaunt and pockmarked, his eyes wide with a cocktail of rage and confusion. He hadn't expected a fight. He lunged again, a wild, telegraphed grab for her. She flowed out of the way, a simple pivot, and slammed the heel of her palm into his nose. There was a sickening crunch, and blood immediately sprayed down his chin. He reeled back, roaring in pain and anger. "You fucking bitch!" he screamed, the words spraying blood. "I'll kill you! Die, bitch! Die!" He reached behind his back, and in the sickly light, she saw the glint of a blade. A hunting knife, maybe 6 inches. It wasn't a surprise. Her assumption had been correct. This had just escalated from a violent mugging to a lethal force encounter. All thoughts of de-escalation, of minimal force, evaporated. And the rules of engagement had changed. He came at her with a wild, slashing motion, the knife tracing a glittering arc in the air. This was his world, drunken brawls and street violence. It was chaotic, unpredictable, and terrifying to an untrained person. To Maya, it was like watching a slow-motion replay. He telegraphed every move with his eyes, his shoulders, the way he shifted his weight. He was a storm of fury, but she was the eye of the storm, calm, centered, and utterly deadly. And she didn't retreat. She moved inside the arc of his swing, a dangerous but calculated move. She used her forearms to deflect his knife hand, redirecting the momentum of his strike past her. It was a technique from Krav Maga, blended with the close-quarters combat she'd learned in the teams. It was about controlling the weapon, not the man. She got both of her hands on his knife-wielding arm, gripping his wrist with a strength that was out of all proportion to her size. He struggled, trying to pull back, to free the blade. He was stronger, but she had the leverage, the position. "You don't want this," she said, her voice low and steady, a stark contrast to his animalistic grunting. It was a command, not a plea. He just snarled and tried to headbutt her. She saw it coming, of course. She ducked her head, letting the top of his skull glance off her temple, and used the momentum to twist his arm further, forcing him off balance. He stumbled, and she went with him, maintaining her grip, taking him to the wet ground. They hit the asphalt hard, him on his back, her on top, controlling his knife hand, pinning it to the ground above his head. Her knees locked his torso, her weight a focal point of pressure on his diaphragm. He thrashed beneath her, but he was pinned, completely, utterly, and professionally pinned. "Let me go! I'll fucking kill you!" he screamed, spittle flying from his lips. He was a trapped animal, all fight and no flight. It was in that moment, with the fight drained out of the situation and only the man's futile struggles remaining, that the world rushed back in. The distant sound of a car horn, a woman's scream from the other side of the parking lot, and new voices, sharp and authoritative. "Freeze! Police! Let him go! Now!" Maya's head snapped up. 2 police cruisers had pulled into the parking lot, their lights flashing, painting the scene in strobing red and blue. 2 officers were advancing on her, weapons drawn, their faces masks of tense focus. From their perspective, it must have looked like a brutal assault. A woman in a gray hoodie was on top of a bloodied, screaming man, apparently beating him senseless. Her training kicked in again, new threat identified. Police, friendly forces but unaware of situation. De-escalate. Comply immediately. Clear, concise communication. She didn't move. Any sudden motion could be misinterpreted. "I am complying," she shouted, and her voice firm and clear. "He has a knife in his right hand. I am holding his knife hand. I am a United States Navy veteran. I am complying." The officers hesitated for a split second, processing the information. "Let go of his hand and put your hands in the air." The lead officer, a burly man with a thick mustache, barked at her. "If I let go, he still has the knife," she replied, her voice calm. "I need you to secure the weapon first." It was a standoff, a bizarre moment of tactical negotiation. The second officer, younger and more jittery, kept his gun trained on her. The lead officer, seeing the blood and the fear in the man's eyes, made a decision. He holstered his weapon, drew his taser, and approached cautiously. "All right," he said to Maya. "I'm going to take his arm. On my count, you let go and move back. Slowly." She nodded. "On your count." He counted. 3, 2, 1. He grabbed the man's wrist, and then Maya instantly released it and scrambled backwards on her hands and knees, then rose to her feet with her hands high in the air. The second officer immediately cuffed her, the plastic ties biting into her skin. It hurt, but she didn't resist. The first officer struggled with the man on the ground, finally wrenching the knife from his grasp and securing him in handcuffs as well. The next hour was a blur of controlled chaos. Paramedics arrived, tending to the man's broken nose. Maya sat on the bumper of a police car, her hands cuffed behind her back, the rain starting to fall again, washing the blood from the asphalt. She was shivering, but she wasn't sure if it was from the cold or the adrenaline crash. The young officer who had cuffed her stood nearby, eyeing her with a mixture of suspicion and awe. Witnesses were interviewed. The woman who had screamed, a man who had been loading his car. They told the police what they had seen, the man attacking her from behind, at the flash of the knife. The story, corroborated by the parking lot's security cameras, began to paint a very different picture from the one the officers had first seen. Finally, a detective arrived, a tired-looking woman in a long coat. She spoke with the lead officer, then walked over to Maya. She looked at the cuffs, then at the young officer, and sighed. "Take those off her," she ordered. As soon as the cuffs were removed, Maya rubbed her raw wrists, and the detective introduced herself as Detective Miller. "You're going to have to come down to the station to give a formal statement," she said, her voice weary but not unkind. "But I've seen the tape. You defended yourself. He's looking at attempted armed robbery and assault with a deadly weapon. He has a record as long as my arm." At the station, the atmosphere was different. The initial suspicion had evaporated, replaced by a palpable curiosity. Detective Miller sat across from her in a small interview room, a cup of lukewarm coffee in front of her. Maya gave her statement in a clear, concise, after-action report style, leaving out the emotional turmoil, sticking to the facts. The approach from behind, the chokehold, the demand for the purse, the knife, her response. When she finished, Detective Miller leaned back in her chair, studying her. "That was some pretty impressive work out there," she said. "The way you controlled him, the way you talked to my officers. Most people freeze, or they get themselves killed. You said you were Navy?" Maya nodded. "I was. Combat training?" "Yes, ma'am." The detective nodded slowly, letting it drop. But Maya could see the questions in her eyes. She knew there was more to the story than a simple veteran. The next few days were a media circus. Someone at the police station, or perhaps one of the witnesses, had leaked the story. And it was picked up by a local news station. "Woman fights off armed attacker in parking lot." Then it went viral. The headline morphed. "Navy veteran disarms knife-wielding attacker." Then came the speculation. Her picture, thankfully a blurry still from the security footage, was everywhere. People were calling her a hero. The police department, eager for some positive press, gave a press conference praising her extraordinary courage and skill. Maya hated every second of it. And the attention was a spotlight she had spent her entire adult life avoiding. Her phone wouldn't stop buzzing with messages from old friends and confused acquaintances. Then, a more specific call came. It was from the public affairs officer at the Pentagon. Her story had reached the highest levels. Someone wanted to talk. A week after the incident, she found herself in an office at the Naval Amphibious Base Little Creek, not far from where her old team was housed. Across a polished wooden desk sat a two-star admiral and a man in a civilian suit, who introduced himself only as Mr. Smith. Mr. Smith did most of the talking. "Your actions have brought a certain level of attention to yourself, Operator Alvarez," he said, his voice smooth as glass. "Attention that, given your previous area of operations, is less than ideal." "I'm aware, sir," Maya said, her voice flat. She felt like she was back in front of a review board. However," the Admiral interjected, his voice gruff but with a hint of a smile in his eyes, "it's also brought a different kind of attention. The right kind." Mr. Smith leaned forward. "Your training kicked in. You assessed a lethal threat and neutralized it with minimal force, while maintaining complete situational awareness, even when local law enforcement arrived. You identified yourself as a veteran, de-escalated the situation with them, and ensured your own safety and the safety of the officers. It was a textbook operation. Maya was stunned. She had expected a reprimand, a lecture about maintaining a low profile. This felt like a debriefing. "We have a problem," the Admiral said, getting straight to the point. "We spend millions of dollars training our people, and then, when their bodies or minds can't take the operational tempo anymore, we cut them loose. We lose that investment, that experience. Yeah, the transition program is a joke. We know it. You know it." Mr. Smith nodded. "But your situation presents a unique opportunity. Your story is out there. It's inspirational. It's a story of resilience, of skill, of a warrior's mindset that doesn't just switch off when the uniform comes off. We want to use it." "How?" Maya asked, her mind racing. "The new Transition Assistance Program," the Admiral said. "It's being completely overhauled, and we want you to be the face of it. But not some bureaucrat in an office, but a real operator. Someone who's been through the fire both overseas and at home. We need someone who can talk to a struggling Marine, a lost sailor, and have them listen. Someone who can teach them that the skills they learn to survive in combat can also help them survive in the world." They explained the vision. It wasn't a publicity stunt. It was a real, funded program with a team of therapists, vocational counselors, and at its heart, peer mentors. And they wanted Maya to be one of the first and most visible of those mentors. She would travel to bases, speak at transition seminars, and work one-on-one with service members facing medical discharge or struggling with reintegration. The knife attack, Mr. Smith concluded, was terrible. But it was also a perfect, real-world demonstration of what we're talking about. You didn't use your SEAL training to go on the offensive. You used it to defend yourself and survive. You adapted. And that's the message. Your skills are transferable. Your value doesn't end with your service. For the first time in months, Maya felt something other than numbness or despair. She felt a flicker of purpose. She thought of the young man with the knife, his face a mask of desperation. She thought of all the other men and women she had served with, now scattered to the wind, many of them fighting their own private wars. She thought of Marcus, offering her a security gig. So in a way to go back to the only world he knew, this was different. This was a way forward, not back. She looked at the Admiral, then at the unreadable Mr. Smith. "What's the catch?" she asked. "No catch," the Admiral said. "It's a job. It's hard work. You'll deal with bureaucracy, with pain, with failure, but you'll also get to help people. Real people. People like you." A few months later, Maya Alvarez stood at a podium in a large, sterile auditorium at Camp Lejeune. And the room was filled with Marines in their service uniforms, their faces a mix of boredom, anxiety, and defiance. They were all within 6 months of separation from the Corps. This was her first major speaking engagement. She wasn't in a gray hoodie now. She wore a simple, well-fitted blazer over a dark shirt. Her hair was neatly pulled back. She looked professional, composed. But the eyes were the same, dark, watchful, and carrying the weight of things seen. And she didn't start with a joke or a canned greeting. She just looked out at them, letting the silence stretch for a moment. "My name is Maya Alvarez," she began, her voice clear and amplified in the large space. "For 8 years, I conducted special operations in some of the most hostile environments on the planet. I was a United States Navy SEAL." A ripple went through the room. The boredom vanished, replaced by sharp curiosity. A female SEAL was rare. A female SEAL standing in front of them, I'd about to talk about transition, was unheard of. About 6 months ago, I was medically separated, and I found myself in a parking lot in Virginia Beach. buying milk and eggs, feeling more lost than I ever did on a mission in the mountains of Afghanistan. She paused, letting the image sink in. A man decided he wanted my purse. He put me in a chokehold from behind, and when I fought back, he pulled a knife, and he told me he was going to kill me. The silence in the room was absolute, and you could have heard a pin drop. For about 90 seconds, I was back in the fight. My training took over. I didn't think about my PTSD. I didn't think about my broken relationships. I didn't think about the nightmares. I just reacted, and I survived. She looked from face to face, connecting with them. The point of this story isn't that I'm a hero. I'm not. The point is that the training that kept me alive that night is the same training that's kept all of you alive. The discipline, the situational awareness, the ability to function under stress, the loyalty to your teammates, that doesn't belong to the Navy or the Marine Corps. It belongs to you. It's yours forever. She leaned forward, her voice dropping slightly, becoming more intimate, more personal. But that training, that mindset, it's a tool. And like any tool, you have to learn how to use it in a new environment. You can't use a hammer to screw in a light bulb. The fight in that parking lot wasn't the fight I was trained for. It was a different kind of fight, with different rules. And I had to adapt, instantly. That's what transition is. It's learning to adapt. It's learning that your value as a person, as a contributor to society, doesn't end with your last day in uniform. It's just the beginning of a new mission. She spoke for another 20 minutes. She talked about the resources of the new program, the therapists who understood combat stress, the vocational counselors who could help translate military skills into civilian resumes, the peer-to-peer network of other veterans who were available 24/7 just to listen. She was honest about the struggles, the loneliness, the feeling of being an alien in your own country. But she was also unwavering in her message of hope and purpose. When she finished, there was a moment of silence, and then the room erupted in applause. It wasn't polite, perfunctory applause. It was the real thing, or the kind of ovation troops give one of their own. And as the applause died down and the lights came up, they didn't just file out. They lined up. One by one, young Marines and seasoned NCOs approached her. Some just wanted to shake her hand and say, "Thank you, ma'am." Others had questions. Others, she could see it in their eyes, just needed to be near someone who understood. A young lance corporal with a haunted look in his eyes lingered until the end. He was thin, his uniform hanging loosely on him. He looked at her, his voice barely a whisper. "The nightmares," he said. "Do they ever stop?" Maya looked at him, seeing herself in his tired eyes. She didn't give him a platitude. She gave him the truth. "No," she said softly. "They don't. But they get quieter. And you learn to live with them. And you learn that you are more than your nightmares. You're a Marine. You're a lot more." She pulled a card from her pocket. On the one for the new program's 24-hour peer support line. "Call this. Anytime. Someone who's been there will answer. I promise." He took the card, clutching it like a talisman, and nodded, a flicker of something like hope crossing his face before he turned and walked away. Maya watched him go, the weight of the moment settling on her shoulders. It was a different kind of weight than her pack or her rifle. It was heavier in a way, but it was also lighter. It had meaning. And the rain in the parking lot, the flash of the knife, the man's guttural scream of, "Die, bitch," it had all led to this. It had stripped away her old identity and forced her to confront a new one. She was no longer just an operator. She was a bridge, a guide, a proof of concept that survival was just the first step. The real mission, she realized, standing in that brightly lit auditorium filled with the echoes of service, was just beginning. And for the first time in a long time, she was ready for it.